Okay, hello pre-calculus students. This is Mr. Medic, and I'm going to be showing you how to solve problems like the first part of 5.4a, which is on page 400. You're asked to solve trigonometric equations, and the instructions say verify that these solutions work. And so the first one says 2 cosine x minus 1 equals 0. So we're going to plug in, according to the a part, x is equal to pi over 3. Now you have to know what the cosine of pi over 3 is in order to do this, because we're going to be saying 2 cosine pi over 3 minus 1, is that equal to 0? So let's find out whether it is or not. Pi over 3 would be right here in the first quadrant, and the cosine is right there, and it's 1/2. So it's 2 times 1/2 minus 1 equals 0. And we know that that's going to be 1, so 1 minus 1 is equal to 0. So, yep, it works. And this is how I want you to show your work, just like that, okay? And now I'm going to skip up to number 5. All of the others follow one of these two examples. This one's a little bit more complicated because you've got 2 places to put x, but it's not that complicated. For number 5, x is first, and for letter A, it's 4/3 pi, so 4 pi over 3. So we're going to go 2 cosine 4 pi over 3 squared plus 3 times the cosine of 4 pi over 3 plus 1 equals 0. Let's see if that's true. First I need to figure out what the cosine of 4 pi over 3 is, so I'm going to draw a little triangle. 4 pi over 3 is in the third quadrant, looks like that. The cosine here is negative 1/2, because that's like a 60-degree angle, but it's in the fourth quadrant. So the cosine is going to be negative 1/2, so we're going to go 2 times negative 1/2 squared plus 3 times negative 1/2 plus 1. Negative 1/2 squared is 1/4, so we get 2 times 1/4 plus negative 1.5 here plus 1. 2 times a fourth is 1/2 minus 1.5 plus 1. Yep, that equals 0, so we've confirmed that. Okay, now I'm going to resume our notes here. I'm skipping up to number 11. Number 11 is typical of the problems like 11, 12, 13, 14. And then it gets a little more interesting for 15 and 16, so I'm going to show 15, and that'll hopefully help you with 16 as well. So notice that on this part, we're looking for all of the answers between one full rotation. Okay, so that means we're going to have to check all the quadrants. That's going to mean quadrants 1, 2, 3, and 4. Remember, we'll have to keep the acrostic ASTC in our heads. That stands for all of the trig functions in quadrant 1 are positive. In quadrant 2, only the sine is positive. In quadrant 3, only the tangent is positive. And in quadrant 4, only the cosine is positive. So we'll keep that in mind as we solve this. The first thing we have to do is get cosine x by itself. So we're going to subtract 1 from both sides, which will get us 2 cosine x is equal to negative 1. You have to divide by 2, and that's going to get us cosine x equals negative 1/2. Now, keeping what we just said in mind about our ASTC, where is the cosine going to be negative? Where is the cosine going to be negative? The cosine will be negative in quadrants 3 and quadrant 2. So as I remember, 1/2, that's a 30, 60, 90. So in the second quadrant, that would look like this. We've got a triangle with 1/2 on the adjacent side. So this is going to be our 30, 60, 90 with negative 1/2 right there. Okay? And in fact, the other triangle we're looking for is in the fourth quadrant, so it's going to be right there. So that's going to be, if it were a 60-degree angle like this, it would be pi over 3. But we're all the way over here, so that's in the second quadrant. So x is 2 pi over 3. And then the pi over 3 that's in the fourth quadrant is pi plus one more pi over 3, so that's 4 pi over 3. So there's our two answers. Don't forget to circle your answers. Now let's go to a more difficult one. 3 cosecant squared x minus 4 equals 0. Now I say it's more difficult, but the truth is it's actually a little simpler. You'll see what I'm talking about as I go through this. When I'm trying to figure out these, I have to figure out which quadrant's the answers are in. And in this case, they were in quadrants 2 and 3, which takes a little bit of thinking. I got to think about where the cosine is negative for that to make sense. I got to stay away from quadrant 1 and quadrant 2 because that's where the cosine is positive. In this case, we won't have that problem. You'll understand why when we have to take a look at that square. And in order to undo it, we have to take its square root. So the first thing I'm going to do to get the cosecant squared x by itself is add 4 to both sides. So that's going to get me 3 cosecant x equals 4. It looks like we're going to be positive for this part of it. And then we have to divide by 3 to get cosecant squared by itself. And we get cosecant squared is equal to 4/3. I think I'm going to take the square root of both sides, but whenever I take the square root of both sides, do you remember what happens to our answer? We don't just get one answer, we get 2. So it's the plus or minus square root of 4/3. The square root of 4 is 2, so this ends up being the cosecant is equal to plus or minus 2 over root 3. Now, I could go ahead and rationalize the denominator, but the truth is I'd rather not work with the cosecant if I have a choice. So since I know that the cosecant is 1 over the sine, I'm just going to reciprocate this whole thing. So that's going to get me 1 over the cosecant of x is equal to plus or minus root 3 over 2. In other words, the sine is equal to plus or minus root 3 over 2. Okay, root 3 over 2, that's a 30, 60, 90. And in the first quadrant, that would look like this, with root 3 over 2 on that opposite side. So that's definitely a 60-degree angle. Now here's the good news. Because it's plus or minus, it's all the 60-degree angles. It's the ones in every quadrant. So all I got to do is write down all the pi over 3's. So it's pi over 3, 2 pi over 3. Moving on to this one, that's 4 pi over 3. And then finally, 5 pi over 3. That's a really horrible 5. Okay, but that's the idea. Which, in a way, it's easier to get those answers than these answers, because on these I had to think about which quadrants I was in. On this one, I get all 4 quadrants, so I don't have to think about it. I just write down all 4 answers. And that's the way that number 16 works like that too. In fact, I believe number 16, I'm checking right now. Yep, it has 4 answers. Same kind of deal. Good luck.